So greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 30th anniversary program of the Labor Archives and Research Center. I'm Catherine Powell, the director of the Labor Archives. So, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully everyone got to see at least one of the dance performances. They were truly amazing. We were lucky to have several students from both cinema and journalism record the dance performances and actually do interviews of the choreographer and the dancers and myself. And so they're going to put together a short film for that, and that will be available online as soon as we get that. So we will definitely transfer that there. Let me just turn that off. So we opened our doors in 1986, and we were an unusual collaboration between the labor movement and academics here at San Francisco State, and also library administrators. They really understood that the Bay Area had a very important part of the labor history of the United States, of California. The first recorded strike was in San Francisco in 1849. The carpenters went out on strike, so this city has a long traditional glorious history of labor organizing. And so we created a center that would collect and document labor organizations, labor leaders, the working people of San Francisco. We have personal papers from many folks. We have oral histories here to document the feelings and experiences of people who lived and worked in the city, and the East Bay and all of the 9 counties that surround the San Francisco Bay. And each year we're used by hundreds of students here at San Francisco State. We have researchers that come from all over the world to do research here as well. And we do lots of classroom presentations to bring students in and have a chance to actually handle primary source material for the first time. We work with students here at San Francisco State and at City College very closely, and they all use the archives. I'd say this semester we had one class in particular that was doing, it's a course on class, and they were doing research in the archives. Each one of the students had to do a paper focusing on some material here in the archives. So we had literally over 30 students over the course of the semester doing very in-depth primary source research, which was really wonderful. So my first speaker today, it's my pleasure to introduce, is Tim Paulson. He is the head of the San Francisco Labor Council and chair of our advisory board. Tim has been a very long time supporter of the archives and makes sure to make the labor community aware of us and support us. So we really appreciate that. So Tim Paulson is going to do welcome.
Great. Thank you, Catherine, and the great team that you guys have all assembled out here. There are many jewels in San Francisco, but when it comes to the labor archives here, it really is pretty phenomenal. And from the old days when we were working on, I don't even remember what street it was, in the leaky place down the road, to actually come in here and run with the big dogs, so to speak. To have the labor archives here is pretty exciting. And since you mentioned San Francisco State and City College in the same breath, I do want to say that I wish I could have seen some of the performances today, but we were walking the halls of City Hall most of the day to work on a new initiative that I think many people have heard about, and that is we're going to try to be maybe the first city in the United States to have a free city college, and the entire labor movement. The entire labor movement is behind this particular initiative. The campaign that you guys did CFA, and I see the president of CFA here and other teachers, to get the contract that you did was pretty remarkable, and it was pretty intense. And I know the whole city was just involved with the CFA struggle as they were with the City College AFT struggle that is still going on in terms of their contract negotiations. But there's really been an education buzz throughout San Francisco over the last period of time, and it's going to continue with the Free City College stuff. So, as Catherine said, I mean, this is the receptacle of our history, not just San Francisco, but a lot of the places in the Bay Area. And just to have this celebration tonight and fundraiser and all is just really exciting, and I'm glad that I had a chance to just say a few words on behalf of the San Francisco Labor Council. So I'm going to leave it at that. And by the way, Catherine, We have changed the Labor Council offices over the last few months. We've remodeled, and that was an excuse for us to actually box up some goodies and put some other stuff in. And even though Catherine has taken a pile of the stuff from the Labor Council that I archived, we still have 6 more boxes that come down that just talks about the history of the Labor Council meetings, the work as the executive director that she told me my first day on the job. Everything that I write and everything that I keep has to go to Labor Archives before or after I die, and so all of the stuff, is moving on that line. So anyway, this is a good confluence of folks, and I'm just welcome everybody, and hope. And let's get into the lecture and all the other stuff that you guys have got planned on this great day here at San Francisco State. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Tim. We really appreciate the support of the San Francisco Labor Council and all of the labor councils in the Bay Area. So it's always good to start a program with thank yous, and I want to acknowledge a lot of the people involved, both in the work here and the program today. So start off with our staff and volunteers. The woman who really does all the work behind the scenes is Tanya Hollis. She's the archivist here at the Labor Archives. Manages the collections and makes our wonderful resources accessible to the students and researchers all around the world. San Francisco State funds my position and Tanya's position, but donations from individuals and unions helps us hire additional part-time staff who really do a lot of the bulk of the work. And a person I really want to acknowledge is Frances Ratton-Kaplan. She is a processing archivist extraordinaire. She has gone through so many of our collections and made them available in such a short amount of time. It's really, truly wonderful. So thank you, Frances. And then also want to acknowledge in the back Leah Ryland. She came to us as an intern from San Jose State. And actually, no, you started out first as a student assistant here working as a student at San Francisco State, and then went to graduate school because she so loved working in the archives. She wanted to become an archivist and went to San Jose State University. Is just about to graduate. So she's been working as our archival assistant and on so many projects I can't even name, but we really appreciate you. And if you want to buy a t-shirt or a book from the Labor Landmarks Guidebook, go in the back and talk to Leah. And also I want to make a note right now before I forget that the author's book is for sale, and so it'll be here at the table. They can only stay till 7, so if you want a copy, feel free anytime during the program to go and buy the book. Okay, so other folks I need to acknowledge, is Eva Martinez. She came to us as an intern and finished her degree, and then she graciously has volunteered for the last year, worked a lot on the UFW collections that we have in the archives, and she was truly wonderful person to work with. So I want to acknowledge our advisory board here at the Labor Archives. We have on our advisory board the heads of all the labor councils in the 9 counties of the Bay Area, in addition to many important historians, archivists, and other folks. So everyone here who is in the advisory board, can you please stand up? I see Bob Cherney in the back, Bill Shields from City College, Tim Paulson from the Labor Council, Debbie Masters, the head of the library here at San Francisco State. And then I think it's really important for us to acknowledge our donors. We raise between $25,000 and $30,000 every year, and we had some key donors this year who donated well over $1,000, including the Northern California Carpenters Regional Council was very generous, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the law firm of Nyhart, Anderson, Flynn, and Grossball, who represent workers in various ways. And then the family of Tim Sampson. Tim Sampson was an incredible organizer, both on campus and in the community, well loved. We still get donations every year in his honor. He passed away many, many years ago. And then also want to thank Robin Walker for a very generous donation. Robin came to us as a museum studies intern, did an incredible exhibit on the Sailors Union of the Pacific, and then has now gone on to be the archivist for the ILWU. So she's a really wonderful person. And then last thing I want to say is we have new associates. They are people who have really generously contributed to the archives, either with their time, with resources, with collections. And this year I really want to acknowledge Sherry Katz and Chris Mays. They were both judges for our student essay contest. And then also Robin Walker. And then lastly, want to thank Academic Technology. They're the ones that are filming this event and provide the sound for today's performances downstairs and then the evening program. Okay. So now on to the fun stuff. we start out by announcing the winners for our student essay contest. We have every year collaborated with the California Faculty Association to sponsor an essay contest on work and workers. And this is funded through the California Faculty Association. And this year, Nyhart, Anderson, Flynn, and Grossball also donated money to help support this wonderful scholarship. So just really want to acknowledge them. And so we're going to announce the winners today at this program. And the awards will be presented by Sheila Tully, who is the president of the California Faculty Association. And she's a faculty member of Women and Gender Studies and of Anthropology. So Sheila Tully.
So thank you very much, Catherine, for inviting me. And one of the great things about teaching here at San Francisco State is working with students. So this is really a pleasure. That students, many people don't know that students today are going to school facing unbelievable challenges. Many students are working full-time or more than full-time and trying to go to school full-time. The rising fees over the last decade, coupled with the cuts in state funding, have made it truly, truly difficult for our students to accomplish all that they do. So it's important to understand that these winners represent the real achievements of so many of our students who are really, in my experience, being ripped off in the last 10 years by paying more and getting so much less from public education, and they deserve better. So it's my pleasure to announce the undergraduate essay winner, Michael Hefner, whose essay is entitled Flushing Unions Down the Drain. Michael could not be here tonight, but I'm going to read an excerpt from his paper. And before I do, I should say that the two awards given to the students, one is sponsored by the California Faculty Association of San Francisco State, and the other is from the Nyhart, Anderson, Flynn, and Grossball law firm. So Michael's paper, and this is just an excerpt. Historians Nelson Lichtenstein, George Lipset, and David Plotke have suggested that the right to collective bargaining was much more than just the right to discuss day-to-day issues with management. Lichtenstein argued that, quote, the responsibilities and expectations of American citizens, due process, free speech, the right of assembly, and petition would now find their place in factory, mill, and office, end quote. It was, they thought, just the next logical step in the development of the American democracy that industrial democracy was to be introduced into the American workplace. Lichtenstein further argued that small, family-owned firms like Kohler, that manufacture toilets, were the shock troops in capital's battle to undermine union power and trans-industry labor standards, end quote. Herbert Kohler was in a unique position to take such a stand. The Kohler was wholly owned by the Kohler family and did not have to answer to either a board of directors or stockholders, so they could decide to take an ideological stand and disregard the financial loss that such a stand would entail. Kim Phillips Fine, in her essay Plumbing Strikes, that appeared in Encyclopedia of Strikes in American History, argued that Kohler was willing to undertake a vigorous campaign against the union for ideological reasons that larger companies would likely eschew. The three generations of the Kohler family were against unions from the start, and they never accepted the legitimacy of a union role in the employee-employer relationship. The company founder, Michael Kohler, decided that he knew what was best for his employees and passed on this attitude to his sons, who later ran the company. The Kohler family was determined to not accept unions or their right to collective bargaining. John Michael Kohler, the founder of the company and patriarch of the family, decided to shut down the plant rather than negotiate with his employees in the 1897 strike. Walter Kohler refused to recognize the union's right to collective bargaining in the 1934 strike. Herbert Kohler refused to submit disputes to the union for arbitration, launching a public relations campaign against labor's right to form unions, and that the NLRB he said, was unconstitutional. So I look forward to reading the rest of this essay. And the other winner of the graduate essay is Jessica Poe, whose essay is Unfree Labor on the Free Frontier, Convict Labor in California, 1851 to 1911. And I believe Jessica is here. Congratulations, Jessica. Congratulations.
So it's kind of a joke, but it's true that you can tell the difference between an undergraduate and a graduate essay. Like, the only difference is that the title is really long and has a colon. So I only have a couple minutes, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do owe a huge thank you to the Labor Archives, without which this paper wouldn't exist. I basically walked in here and said, hey, I have a crazy idea. Is it possible to write a paper about convict labor in California? Because that's not something people really talk about in the 19th century. People mostly who are interested in the 19th century and convict labor are interested in the South. And the labor archivists and librarians were skeptical, but they didn't give up. And weeks later, I was still getting emails from them. Oh, we found this source. You should come in and try it. So I owe this paper to them. So thank you so much. But I do want to get to the good stuff with this, because of some of the primary research that I had to do for this paper was so much fun. From its beginning, California legislators were interested in how best to utilize their burgeoning prison population. So this is as early as 1849, by the way, in the ratification of the first Constitution. Interestingly, over the entire course of California's experiments with convict leasing, contracted convict labor, and finally a state-use labor system, the legislator never sought to question whether it might be a better idea to reform the laws to send fewer people to prison. On the contrary, in 1855, the legislature passed laws like one to punish vagrants, vagabonds, and dangerous and suspicious persons, which proposed to sentence a wide variety of people, including homeless wanderers, beggars, common prostitutes, and common drunkards, to jail and hard labor for up to 90 days. Leasing out the prisoners to one James Estelle, who would house, guard, employ, and clothe them, seemed the most logical solution in 1851, especially for a state which did not levy income taxes. At this time, state leadership was not yet concerned with issues of competition between free and unfree labor. Their only concern was that Estelle would cheat them and subcontract out the prisoners under his jurisdiction. It would be dangerous to the discipline of the prison, they fretted. At the first quarrel between Estelle and an outside contractor, either the discipline would be relaxed to get more work done in a day, or the outside man would be forced to abandon by the lessee. Regardless of the potential risks, the Joint State Prison Committee concluded jubilantly that after a month, the prison institution ought to support itself by the products of its own labor. No problems here. James Estelle lost his contract only a few short years after he had received it. Just 1 year after the prison committee concluded that the state prison institution would soon be self-supporting, a new board of directors for the state prison grimly seized that power from Estelle, who had sorely abused it. A routine inspection had revealed that prisoners were without shoes, badly clad, and in other respects in bad condition. The board provided shoes and clothing to those who were lacking, and the prisoners were reacquired by the state that had wished to foist their care off on someone else. Whether or not to use convict labor was never the question. The debate was over how best to utilize that labor. With the failure of the lease system, legislators turned to the contract system, which by 1872 was well and truly entrenched. In their annual report on the condition of the state prison, the Joint Committee found that out of 883 prisoners, 421 were employed by outside contractors. There were three main contractors at this time: Stone Hayden, saddle and harness makers, who contracted approximately 115 convicts at any given time; Merriam and Cole, furniture manufacturers, who employed approximately 200; and A.W. Baldwin, a boot and shoe manufacturer who usually employed about 100 laborers. In addition to the contracted laborers, an additional 200 prisoners were employed by the state as waiters, cooks, clerks, washmen, gardeners, teamsters, etc. Convict laborers also made bricks in San Quentin's brickyard, a practice that would continue. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to win this song.
Thank you. We especially love it when the essay contest winners use the archives in their research. I want to first introduce our guest speaker for today. She is Myra Strober, a labor economist at Stanford University, professor emerita in the Graduate School of Education, and professor of economics at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, and the founding director of the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. She is an author of numerous articles on women's employment, occupational segregation, feminist economics, and the economics of childcare. Her most recent book is a memoir, Sharing the Work, What My Family and Career Taught Me About Breaking Through and Holding the Door Open for Others. So without further ado, welcome Myra Strober.
Thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be here. My undergraduate work was at Cornell in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations, and so everything that everybody's said so far is very familiar. I'm going to read several excerpts from my memoir. Catherine said that the theme should be exclusion, so that is the theme. And you will see that although these stories come from several different years, they all talk about exclusion. It's because you live in Palo Alto, the chairman of Berkeley's economics department tells me. I can't have a regular job here because I live in Palo Alto? He nods. Chairman Brake is tall, with football player shoulders. And although I'm tall too, his massive frame towers over me. He's the big shot in one of the most prestigious economics departments in the country. I'm the assistant professor wannabe. If this meeting doesn't go well, he could decide not to hire me for next year. Under my jacket, rivulets of perspiration are making their way down my Dress for Success blouse. You have to live in Berkeley to be on your tenure track? Again, he nods. I'm baffled. I never knew that. My husband, Sam, is a medical resident at Stanford and works incredibly long hours. Often he goes back to his lab late at night to check on his experiments. We have to live in Palo Alto. Okay, I say softly, getting up to leave. Thank you very much. When I get to my office, my hands are shaking. I can hardly insert my key into the lock. I feel drained, disoriented. Did I take something out of the freezer for tonight's dinner? Lamb chops? Hamburger? I dial home, but Margie, my babysitter, doesn't pick up. She's probably taken the kids out somewhere. I leave my office and walk across Sproul Plaza, surprisingly quiet after all the years of student demonstrations. It's 1970, and the Vietnam War is beginning to wind down. I slide into my full-size blue Chevy with a trunk large enough to hold both a stroller and a carriage and review my meeting with Brake. I spend a lot of time in Big Blue these days. It's about an hour between Palo Alto and Berkeley in the morning and longer in the afternoon, and I do the commute 3 days a week. Gradually, crawling in stop-and-go traffic toward the Bay Bridge, the absurdity of Brake's answer registers. My first response is to cry. I grope around in my purse, pull out some tissue, and dab at my eyes. But now the road is blurry. I switch my thoughts to my children. Mommy, Mommy, Jason, my 3-year-old, will scream with delight when he hears my key in the door. And Liz, 11-month-old, will follow his lead. She'll speed across the living room on all fours, tug on my leg, and make joyful noises. Suddenly, the traffic starts to move. I can never tell why the snarls dissolve, but I'm always grateful. As I drive at normal speed, my thoughts turn back to Brake. But this time, instead of tears, I'm aware of growing anger at myself. What's wrong with you? I scream inside my head. You let him humiliate you. You let him make you look mute. You're a smart woman, and you let him make you look stupid. Faculty don't have to live in Berkeley to be on the tenure track. He fed you pure bull, and you bought it. You want to know why you can't have a tenure-track job at Berkeley? Look at what's real. There are no women, except Margaret, on the whole economics department faculty, and although she's been there for more than 20 years, she's still a lecturer. Wake up. The difference between a lecturer and an assistant professor is monumental. Assistant professors have a regular job with an opportunity for promotion and lifetime tenure. Lecturers, on the other hand, are on a road to nowhere. They're appointed from year to year, generally only a few months before their teaching is to begin, and have no chance of advancing. I've worked too hard for too many years to be content with second-class citizenship. I intend to get the real deal at Berkeley. When I finally get onto the Bay Bridge, my anger changes. Now I'm furious with Brake. How dare he tell me I have to live in Berkeley? The radio is tuned to the talk station, and I registered Joe Carcione, the popular greengrocer, instructing the whole Bay Area about choosing pumpkins. Ah, Halloween is coming. Maybe I could revisit Brake's office in costume. Witch? Skeleton? Big bird? Surely some costume could shake him out of his "we all have to live in Berkeley" routine. With my sheath skirt and matching man-tailored jacket, I'm wearing stockings and high heels. The stockings feel sticky, and the shoes pinch every time I accelerate. How I would love to kick off those shoes. Whoever invented high heels definitely didn't have driving in mind. I'm getting angrier by the second. At the traffic, which has snarled again, at my gluey stockings and too tight high heels, and at my own naivete. But most of all, I'm angry at Brake. Slowly, I begin to understand what people mean when they say their anger makes them see red, because a swelling fury, a deep scarlet anger now floods the car. The steel frame and glass windows can't contain it, and it bursts onto the road like a flaming oil slick, a torrent sliding over the bridge's girders and thundering across the bay. As the lights of San Francisco begin to flicker against the darkening sky, I feel a flicker of light within myself. I become a feminist on the Bay Bridge. Okay, this story is from 1964. The morning of my first day at MIT, I'm carrying an armful of my husband's shirts to the laundry. I step off the curb and sprain my ankle, so I'm a few minutes late when I limp into Charlie Meyer's graduate labor relations seminar. I'm the only woman in the class. "I think you're in the wrong room, young lady," Myers says as I sit down. "No, I don't think so. I'm Myra Strober." "Oh, you're Myra Strober," he smiles. "Well, welcome then." The message is clear. In general, women are brushed off, but somehow I'm an exception. I try to puzzle it out. By some means or other, I'm an honorary man. In my PhD economics cohort of about 30 students, there are 3 women, and I'm the only one who's married. My fellow students are cordial and accept me readily into study groups, but I don't become particularly friendly with any of them. I'm starved for female companionship. The secretaries and women administrators see me as odd, and while they greet me politely, they rarely engage me in their conversations. My best chats are with the janitor, a spirited woman with a lively Irish accent and 7 children. When we talk mid-morning in the ladies' room, she cheers me on. "Your mother must be proud of you, getting all this education. Don't you worry, you're the only woman. You'll do yourself proud." Sometimes, when my desire to interact with women gets intense, I take the MTA a few stops from MIT to downtown Boston and go to Filene's basement. The basement has no dressing rooms, so women parade around in their underwear, trying on blouses, skirts, dresses, and coats, and asking other women what they think of their proposed new outfits. I have no money to buy anything, but I love to try on new fashions, get other women's comments, and help them assess what they're considering. "No, it's all wrong," I tell one woman. "The horizontal stripes make you look fat, and you're not fat." She tells me, "You're so skinny to begin with. That skirt makes you look like a long drink of water. Try this one. The pleats will give you some hips." After an hour or so of good-natured bantering with women I have never seen before and never will see again, I'm in a better mood and ready to go back to the library to conquer calculus, the elasticity of substitution, or aggregate production functions. As a student, I had no idea how male my chosen field was. But in the mid-1960s, women made up only 7% of doctoral recipients in economics. I also had no idea how quintessentially male MIT was. Of its more than 6,000 students at the time, only 400, or a little under 7%, were women, about 200 undergraduates and 200 graduate students. Some 15 years after my MIT experience, Rosabeth Moss Kanter would coin the term tokenism for the strangeness I felt at MIT. But during my MIT years, I had no term except the one I coined for myself, honorary man. Okay. This next anecdote is when I first joined the faculty at the Stanford Business School in 1972. A few weeks after I joined the faculty, Lee Bach asked me to give a seminar on my research. This is a critical invitation because I was not asked to give a job talk when I was interviewed for my position. I've never really met most of my economics colleagues, and they've never heard me speak. I want to make a good impression. In fact, I want to do more than that. I want to wow them, show them that they've hired a really superb thinker. Since I've spent the whole summer working on the economics of childcare, I decide to speak on that. I know childcare is one of the most controversial subjects of the day, but I feel the topic gives me an opportunity to convey innovative thinking and show my ability to think like an economist. I work on the talk for several days, carefully considering each word. The first part explains why the childcare market is not working well, and the second presents an economic argument in favor of government subsidization. The talk feels solid, and I rehearse it over and over. On the appointed day, I dress carefully, in my most conservative summer suit with high heels and stockings, and look forward to what I expect will be an interesting exchange of views. I introduce my lecture by saying I intend to argue that good childcare produces numerous external benefits, benefits beyond those accruing to those who receive the service directly, and that because of those external benefits, there is a powerful economic case for the government to subsidize childcare, much in the way it subsidizes education. But I never get past the first 3 minutes of what I've prepared. The setup is akin to a Greek tragedy, in which the protagonist is unaware that her doom has been sealed before the play even begins. My colleagues, 15 conservative white male professors of economics and finance, are aghast at my ideas and begin sputtering in unison. They have the same view as President Nixon, who less than a year earlier vetoed a bill that would have provided federal funding for a comprehensive child care system. Nixon's reasoning? Such a system would, quote, weaken the family, unquote. My argument is outrageous, my colleagues proclaim, and they spend the next 50 minutes cataloging the evils of government intervention in general and intervention in child care in particular. Lee Bach, who was ostensibly chairing the seminar, never intervenes to restore order, and I'm too inexperienced and cowed to do it myself. Finally, blessedly, it's 1 p.m., and the men who were supposed to be my audience leave. I knew that many of my economist colleagues were conservative, but I didn't think I would be the only progressive in the room, or at least the only one speaking up. Now I see I'm a double minority at the school, not only the first woman economist, but also the first liberal economist. I'm alarmed and walk back to my office, trembling, just as I did after my first interview with George Brake. Now what? How can I possibly succeed in this place? Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, yes. I just know that so many of you had similar experiences. That was the time. Yes.
So what was your career progression then? I know you talked about being at MIT and at Berkeley.
So I got an offer from Berkeley as an assistant professor. And they told me, I'd been there for 2 years when I got the offer. They told me it was because they had come to know me and they had read my doctoral dissertation, and I was now just the right person for their job. However, I don't believe that was the only factor, because the Women's Equity Action League filed a complaint, not a suit, with the Labor Department against Berkeley. And Berkeley was not the only university where there was a suit filed, where there was a complaint filed. In fact, the complaints read like a who's who of higher education. And the Department of Labor came to Berkeley to investigate sex discrimination at Berkeley. And that's how come I got the offer, I believe. Now, Stanford was not sued, but Stanford was afraid it would be sued. And so the year I was hired, they hired at the business school the first woman, the first African American, the first Asian American, and the first Hispanic. At the law school, they hired the first woman. At the School of Engineering, they hired the first woman. So these complaints filed by the Women's Equity Action League were very potent. And I decided to accept Stanford's offer because it meant I could stop commuting. But I don't think I would have had a much easier time at Berkeley either. I was turned down for tenure at the business school. I was the first woman there and the first woman to leave there. And fortunately for me, I had begun collaborating with some colleagues in the School of Education. And so they offered me a tenured position. It's a longer story than that, which is all in the memoir, but I finally got a tenured position at the School of Education. I was so alienated at the business school that when students asked me to help them start Stanford Center for Research on Women, even though I knew that that would never do me any good in the tenure fight, I did. And so I was the founding director of that center. Yes.
When you got there, you stayed for a while
Where? At the business school?
at Stanford at the business school.
Mhm.
And in the period of your career and after, what changes have you seen, the experiences of women stepping into that rarefied atmosphere, competitive atmosphere?
Yeah. Stanford has changed a lot, and it has a long way to go, as does the rest of academia. So Stanford now, 26% of the faculty is women. It was 9% when I came. And Stanford has a pretty good sexual harassment policy now, although the big issue now is the tragedy of sexual assault. So we've moved from sexual harassment to sexual assault. Can't say there's much progress there. I think there are still departments that have very few women in the sciences, in engineering. It's still very difficult for women to succeed in academia. And no, there's still exclusion. And also the way in which the profession is structured is, whoever made up the system didn't have women in mind. So exactly the time when you're trying to get tenure is the time when you're raising young children. And now things have improved. It's possible to stop the tenure clock. With my second child, I was out for a grand total of 3 weeks. And one of my colleagues took my class while I was out those 3 weeks. So things have improved. There's now maternity leave. There's even paternity leave. And there is a childcare center I mean, there was no such thing as a child care center when I was starting out. And I believe the toughest thing I've ever done was hire a babysitter to take care of my children, of my child. I was 26 years old. I'd never interviewed anybody for anything. One person answered my ad, and I interviewed her. And, you know, we worked together for a couple of weeks so I could see how she was. She seemed good. I was convinced that she was going to kidnap my child when I left to go to school. There was no such thing, you know, as reference checks. There were no. So things have changed for the better a lot with regard to child care and maternity leaves. That said, we still could use a national system of child care. And as you know, since Nixon vetoed that bill, there's never been a bill that came to a president's desk to sign. Yes?
Is there much transparency when it comes to the salaries that females earn in education opposed compared to the males? You know, they mentioned in the aerial performance outside lowering the salary of males in some industries so that females would get equal pay.
So in public universities, salaries are public. At places like Stanford, salaries are not public. And I was appointed by the provost in 1992 to run a task force on recruitment and retention of women faculty. And lots of the women we interviewed said they were leaving because they felt they were underpaid. But they didn't know whether they were underpaid or not. So I went to the provost and I said, you know, you want to increase retention? We have to see salaries. Oh, he said, you can't see salaries. Salaries are private. He said, I'll take a look at the salaries. I said, you can take a look at them anytime. You appointed this committee. You asked me to chair this. I need to look at these salaries. So he said, okay. He would prepare a scatter plot for full professors only in each of the schools. And he would put a black circle around the plot, the dot that represented a woman. And so on the vertical axis was a salary. On the horizontal axis is years since PhD. And he divided the sample into quintiles, 5 groups. The pattern was so clear that you didn't have to do any statistical analyses on these women. The women were all in the bottom quintile. There was not a single woman in the upper quintile. And, you know, it didn't matter how many years you had your PhD, the pattern was all the women were on the bottom. And he was shocked, provost. He was a good guy. He was shocked. I was not shocked. This is what I knew. And so he created a fund to increase women's salaries, not lower men's salaries, increase women's salaries. And he, from then on, insisted that all the deans prepare these same kind of scatter plots and justify any person in the bottom quintile. What was wrong with this person's career? Then, shortly thereafter, the statistical analyses got more sophisticated. And he also appointed someone who women could go to find out whether they were underpaid. So the person would look and, you know, say yes or no, maybe, whatever. And then there was a fund to increase salary. So I personally got a huge salary increase at that time. But before long, everything was out of whack again. Why? Because the way that salaries are set is by bringing in an outside offer. So if Princeton wants you, or Brown wants you, or Yale wants you, or where, you come in with the letter and you say, look, I'm leaving unless you raise my salary. Well, it turns out that women don't look for jobs like that. They're already tied to the area for one reason or another. I mean, when I became a full professor, I asked my education school dean for an increase in salary, and he said, if you want an increase in salary, you have to get an outside offer. Wait, I got a small increase, but I was so underpaid. He said, you have to get an outside offer. I said, how can I get an outside offer? I've just gotten married to this wonderful man over here, and everybody knows that he moved for me. He came to Stanford. Who's going to believe that I'm going to move again for some other place? And he said, well, if you don't want to get an outside offer, my hands are tied. I can't do anything for you. So, it keeps getting out of whack. They keep trying to fix it, and it's not a very good system. Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the other, like your research and your experiences of the way that gender exclusion and inequities have played out in different work areas? I know it's a broad question, but just sort of thinking some stories that
Yeah.
come to mind.
One of the things that fascinated me after that Bay Bridge experience was, why are certain jobs women's jobs and other jobs men's jobs? And Jane knows I did a lot of work with a historian of education at the School of Education, David Tyack, wonderful man, who was interested in why teaching was a woman's occupation. And he thought originally that maybe it was because women teachers could be hired for less than men, which they could. And I said, that doesn't work, because women could be hired for less in any job, and somehow or other they're not. So, if you look at the labor history of the steel industry, for example, steel mill owners went all the way to Poland to recruit men to come as immigrants to the United States to be steel workers. The wives were right there. They could have hired the wives to work in the steel mills. It was unthinkable. And any high-paying job was, and to some extent is, considered a good job for men who, after all, have to support their family. And despite the fact that now, first of all, many children are being raised by single mothers. It's the mother that has to support the family. But, and in two-career families, now 25% of women in two-career families earn more than their husbands. But it's still seen that, the best jobs for a particular level of education are reserved for men. And my own research on bank tellers, on teachers, shows that women come into a job like bank telling when the job is less attractive to men. So although we tend to think about women moving into a job, what's really happening is men are moving out into something more attractive. Attractive in terms of salary, in terms of working conditions, again, for a particular level of education. So take bank tellers. In the 1930s, the Industrial Relations Group at Princeton did a study of bank employment. They couldn't find a single bank teller that was a woman. And so they asked the bank employers, how come? And the answer was, who would walk into a bank and hand their money over to a woman? We can't hire women. So no women bank tellers. Then comes World War II. So women move into bank telling. But women moved into a lot of jobs during World War II, and then they got out of them. But in bank telling, what happened was the banks tried to recruit men back. But now we had the GI Bill, and those men that might have come in as bank tellers now were going to college, and if they did come into banking, they came in at a much higher level. So bank telling became a woman's occupation. It didn't take long, somewhere between 10 and 20 years. And if you look at the salary for a bank teller in the 30s and 40s, as compared to other high school graduates, it was a very attractive job. By the time the 60s and 70s came around, it was no longer an attractive job. It was lower than the average high school graduate. So we understand a little bit about how this is not purely an economic process. This is an economic process overlaid with lots of social expectations and politics, and then you get the picture that we've had, where men at a particular level of education have higher jobs. And by the way, you know, what we see now in higher education, with more women getting bachelor's degrees than men, we saw that in the early 1900s for high school graduates. Women were much more likely to be high school graduates because so many jobs were open to men without a high school education that paid well. But for a woman, you know, probably you would become a secretary and you needed a high school degree for that. So that's a long answer to your question. Yes?
In your work in higher education and your study of the workforce in higher education, I would like you to respond to what's happened to the workforce in higher education in the years since you got the job, which was that most people are not even competing for jobs like the one you got, tenure-track job, potentially. But those jobs are now the privileged minority of 25% across higher education. And the rest are contingent of one sort or another, like the lecture we discussed at Berkeley. And that the gender difference in who has those jobs hasn't really changed a bit. Women are about as likely to have, slightly more likely to have tenure-track jobs than they were when you were. But those numbers of those jobs has, and percentage of those jobs has collapsed down to 25%. And women are the vast majority, well, not the vast majority in some fields, but the absolute majority of the contingent 75%. So, comment.
Sad, very sad. And as you well know, the effect of all of that is not just on the faculty member. It's also on the student, and it's on the institutions, because people who are contingent faculty, especially if they're running from one institution to another to make up a living, don't have time to serve on committees, to absolutely. And I think that the situation is very much related to what's going on in K-12 education. I think that we as a nation have not convinced the public that it's important to fund higher education and K-12 education in such a way that provides jobs for people on which they can live. You know, it's the public sector. Why are we spending more money on prisons than on education? Why are we not valuing education? You know, I think a lot of what you see in politics today is a result of not valuing education. You know? Not valuing facts, not teaching people the difference between facts and and other stories. I think it's all of a piece, and it's extremely sad. Now, that's not to say that other countries have a better situation. You know, I have European colleagues who have moved from Europe to the United States because their situation is not very good there either. Very sad. Yes?
How supportive is that 25% who are tenured and sort of have what everybody would like to believe as a professor's job? How supportive are they of those other folks who go from campus to campus or adjuncts or whatever? How supportive are they of the struggle of the say, lesser of the group on campus?
So first of all, the 75% versus 25% is true if you count part-time people, and if you also count graduate students who are teaching. If you count only full-time people, then it's people who are on the tenure track or tenured are a higher percentage than 25%. But also, if you look, you see that, for instance, at a place like Stanford, most faculty are on the tenure track, unless they're, in the medical school or in the business school, or, they come in for a particular reason I'm thinking in the business school of people who are lecturers in entrepreneurship. So they have to have been entrepreneurs first. You're not going to find a regular faculty member generally who has been an entrepreneur. But I would say that because places like Stanford don't see very many lecturers, or if they see them, it's in the foreign language department and not across the whole university, they're not familiar with what the overall situation is, unless they happen to have somebody in their family that's in that situation. So I would say that there's very little solidarity, sympathy, understanding, concern, partly through ignorance.
Even though it's very common knowledge through academics of the situation?
So here's the problem. How do you find out about this? Either you read it in the general press, or you find that your own graduate students are not getting tenure track positions, okay? So at places like Stanford, your graduate students are getting tenure track positions. So you don't have an understanding of what, not in all fields, there are some fields in the humanities where that's not true, but in the social sciences and sciences, or they're going into postdocs with the possible opportunity to get a tenure track position later. So I don't see that there's a great deal of work in any of the disciplinary associations on this question. And I think if you wanted to build solidarity, you'd have to sit down and make up a strategic plan on how to do that. It's not happening by itself.
So it's just a comment. So I tell my students and I tell my daughter, who, when she entered the job market, let's stop being polite about money and salaries, and let's start asking each other, how much do you make? How much do you make? And my daughter, who's not an academe, she's a music writer, asked her male colleague how much he made, and he was earning $10,000 more than she was, and she had been there longer and had more skills. And she called me and said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Go to your boss and tell him, hey, what's up with this?" And I think part of the problem is we are very polite and we don't talk to each other. But there's a difference between, I'm a lecturer, and there's the abstract knowledge of knowing people are poorly paid, and then there's the very concrete knowledge of knowing many lecturers earn $30,000 a year and try to survive in the Bay Area. So I think if we just talk to each other, we could go a long way in kind of unmasking what's really happening, not just in academe, but in the job market in general.
Yes, and a lot of the pay equity bills, both the national bills and the local bills, talk about the importance of transparency, that's the buzzword, and talk about how it's important that these bills protect the jobs of people who are transparent, because some people lose their job for telling a colleague. So for instance, your daughter, what?
It's illegal for them to fire people for that.
Yes, but we're trying to make it absolutely illegal for that, to say that if you talk about what you earn and somebody compares himself to you, your job is protected. We have a long way to go.
Thank you, Myra. I really deeply appreciate you being willing to come and be our guest speaker to celebrate our 30th anniversary. We in the archives, we have a lot of material actually that really addresses this issue. There was a comparable Worth strike in San Jose in 1980 that we have organizers' files in relationship to a number of organizations from the 70s, like Union Wage, which was a feminist labor group that we have material, tradeswomen who helped try to get women into non-traditional work. So if you're interested in doing research further, go to the work of Myra Strober, come to the archives, look at the materials we have here. And yes, we have a long way to go still. So thank you all for coming. I want to thank President and Mrs. Wong for joining us. I know it's a little tension there, but really appreciate that you came and joined us and came for the performance earlier. And really want to thank all of you for coming here and celebrating with us. So hopefully we'll see you next year. Thank you.